What if the monsters lurking in our oldest stories weren't just nightmares made flesh, but hidden teachers guiding us through life's greatest challenges? Across ancient civilizations, from the misty forests of Europe to the sun-baked temples of Mesopotamia, cultures wove tales of terrifying creatures not merely to frighten, but to forge resilience, reveal power, and encode the secrets of survival. These weren't just stories to scare children around the fire. They were blueprints for navigating a world full of unseen dangers. Think about the Hydra, its many heads regrowing with each strike, teaching warriors the futility of brute force. Or the Mesopotamian chaos beasts, embodying the unpredictable fury of nature, reminding communities to prepare for the storms both outside and within. These monsters were mirrors, reflecting back the fears and strengths of the societies that created them. But why did so many cultures, separated by oceans and centuries, conjure such similar creatures? The answer lies in the universal human experience, the struggle against forces greater than ourselves. Whether it's the dragon hoarding gold in a mountain cave or the serpent coiled around sacred knowledge, these beings symbolize the tests we all face: the battle against greed, the quest for wisdom, the balance between chaos and order. Their stories weren't just entertainment, they were survival manuals disguised as folklore. Imagine a time before textbooks or laws, where the only way to pass down critical lessons was through vivid, unforgettable tales. A single story about a monster could teach generations how to respect authority, harness their courage, or even recognize the monsters within their own hearts. Today, we're going to unravel the hidden logic behind these ancient myths, starting with one of the most enduring figures of all, the dragon. More than just a fire-breathing menace, the dragon appears in cultures from China to Scandinavia as a paradox, a destroyer and a guardian, a symbol of greed and a keeper of profound secrets. What deeper truths lie beneath its scales? How did our ancestors use this creature to explore the boundaries of human ambition and the price of power? By the end of this journey, you'll never look at these legendary beasts the same way again. They weren't just monsters, they were the first teachers, hiding life's hardest lessons in plain sight. So let's step into the shadows of history and uncover what these creatures were really trying to tell us. The legend of Fafnir, the Norse dwarf who became a dragon, holds a chilling lesson about the corrupting power of greed. Cursed by his obsession with stolen gold, Fafnir's body twisted into a monstrous form, his humanity swallowed by scales and flame. But this wasn't just a cautionary tale about wealth. Across medieval Europe, dragons like him embodied the very real threats societies faced: hoarded resources that fueled wars, the unpredictable fury of wildfires, or the untamed wilderness lurking beyond village walls. To slay a dragon wasn't just an act of heroism, it was a metaphor for taming chaos itself. Scholar Joseph Campbell saw dragons as threshold guardians, creatures that stood between ordinary people and the treasures or trials they sought. Whether guarding a princess, a golden hoard, or sacred knowledge, these beasts tested a hero's resolve. Defeating one meant proving you were ready for the power or wisdom that lay beyond. In ancient Mesopotamia, the chaos dragon Tiamat represented the formless void, and her defeat by the god Marduk mirrored humanity's struggle to bring order to a wild world. For farmers, dragons might symbolize droughts or floods; for traders, the dangers of distant lands. Every victory over these creatures mirrored real-world triumphs, clearing forests for crops, establishing safe trade routes, or uniting tribes against common threats. Yet not all dragons were enemies to be slain. In China, the Lung Dragon danced among clouds, bringing life-giving rains and blessing emperors with wisdom. Unlike Western fire breathers, these serpentine beings were revered as water deities, reflecting a culture that prized harmony with nature over conquest. The difference is striking. Where European tales often ended with a dragon's corpse, Eastern legends celebrated coexistence. This duality reveals how societies projected their deepest values onto these creatures, whether as adversaries to overcome or forces to appease. Even the serpent, a dragon's close cousin, carried this balance of danger and wisdom. The Mesopotamian Mushasu dragon, with its coiled body and forked tongue, was both a symbol of chaos and a sacred companion to gods. In Greek myths, the python guarded Delphi's oracle, its defeat marking the rise of Apollo's rational order, but not before the serpent whispered prophecies. These stories remind us that monsters weren't just obstacles, they were keepers of secrets demanding respect even in their defeat. So the next time you hear a dragon's roar in an old tale, listen closely. It might be hiding the voice of an ancient teacher, urging us to confront the chaos and the wisdom within ourselves. The serpent slithers through our oldest myths wearing two faces, one of destruction, the other of rebirth. Take the Babylonian Mushasu, its sinuous body draped over temple gates like a living warning. To the untrained eye, it might seem a mere monster, but this hybrid creature, part serpent, part dragon, was both a guardian of sacred spaces and a manifestation of divine power. Its coiled presence whispered a paradox. The same force that could strike with divine wrath also shielded civilizations from chaos. This duality wasn't unique to Mesopotamia. In the Garden of Eden, the serpent didn't just bring about humanity's fall. It delivered the painful gift of knowledge, forcing Adam and Eve to see the world as it truly was. Here, the serpent plays the trickster, a role found in cultures worldwide, where boundaries between villain and teacher blur. Across the ocean, the Mayan feathered serpent Kukulkan wove celestial wisdom into the fabric of daily life. Its undulating forms symbolize the connection between heaven and earth, its movements mirroring the cycles of rain and drought that dictated survival. Farmers watched for its celestial counterpart, the constellation we call the Milky Way, to time their plantings. Unlike the Edenic serpent, Kukulkan wasn't a tempter but a bridge, turning cosmic patterns into practical guidance. Yet both creatures shared a purpose. They forced humans to confront forces beyond their control, whether the unpredictability of nature or the weight of moral choice. Even in healing, serpents carried this dual meaning. The rod of Asclepius, still a symbol of medicine today, shows a serpent shedding its skin, an ancient emblem of renewal. Greek physicians understood what these creatures represented, the painful but necessary process of transformation. To heal often means to first endure, just as a serpent must writhe free of its old self to grow. This sheds light on why serpents appear as both villains and saviors. They embody the cycles we fear but cannot escape: death before rebirth, knowledge that wounds before it enlightens, chaos that must be faced to find order. So why do cultures from Babylon to Greece to the Americas keep returning to this paradoxical creature? Perhaps because the serpent's greatest lesson is that wisdom and danger are entwined. To grasp one, we must risk encountering the other. And if serpents teach us to navigate the contradictions of the earth, their oceanic counterparts, the leviathans and krakens of ancient seafaring tales, force us to confront the vast, untamed unknown. These monsters didn't just lurk in the depths, they mirrored humanity's vulnerability against the indifferent power of the sea. Beneath the waves, where sunlight fades into darkness, ancient cultures imagined creatures vast enough to swallow ships whole, beings like Tiamat, the Mesopotamian mother of monsters. More than just a chaotic force, she represented the untamed ocean itself, her serpentine body churning the waters before the gods carved order from her remains. This wasn't mere storytelling, it was a way to explain the inexplicable. How else to describe the sudden fury of a storm or the crushing depths that claimed unlucky sailors? The Vikings, too, knew this terror. Their kraken wasn't just a tentacled nightmare, it was the embodiment of hidden reefs that splintered hulls and rogue waves that dragged men into the abyss. To blame a monster was to give shape to the ocean's indifference, turning random tragedy into something that could at least be named, if not conquered. Greek sailors faced their own watery horrors in the Strait of Messina, where Scylla's snapping jaws and Charybdis' whirlpool mirrored very real currents and rocky outcrops. These twin perils weren't just obstacles for Odysseus, they were nautical landmarks turned mythical, a warning to choose the lesser of two evils. Even today, marine biologists speculate that sightings of giant squid, their arms thicker than ship masts, fed kraken legends. Imagine a weary fisherman glimpsing something massive coil beneath the waves, its true size distorted by fear and foam. In an era without sonar or weather forecasts, the line between creature and catastrophe blurred. But sea monsters did more than explain nature's wrath, they mirrored human vulnerability. The fear of drowning, of vanishing without a trace, became the leviathan's gaping maw. Starvation on endless waters, that was the sea serpent that followed ships for days, a hunger given scales. Isolation in the vast blue wilderness, the kraken's grip pulling sailors away from the world of light and air. These stories weren't just about danger, they were about the fragility of human ambition against the infinite deep. And just as the ocean birthed its terrors, so too did the land, where monsters took hybrid forms to deliver even more nuanced warnings. Griffins with the body of a lion and the wings of an eagle guarded gold in Central Asian tales, blending the threats of predators and treacherous terrain. The Egyptian Ammit, part lion, hippo, and crocodile, awaited sinners in the afterlife, a patchwork of nature's deadliest forces. These creatures weren't random nightmares but carefully crafted symbols, stitching together fears to teach lessons too complex for words alone. Where sea monsters externalized the dread of the unknown, land hybrids embodied the consequences of crossing boundaries, whether moral, social, or natural. Chimeras and hybrids weren't just monsters, they were warnings stitched together from the fabric of human fear. Take the Egyptian Ammit, her lion's mane bristling, a hippo's bulk rooted in the mud, jaws of a crocodile snapping shut on unworthy hearts. This wasn't random nightmare fuel. Each piece of her was a deliberate choice, the lion's dominance, the hippo's uncontrollable rage, the crocodile's patient ambush. Together, they became the ultimate judge of morality, a creature that didn't just punish sin but embodied its consequences. The message was clear: stray from Maat, the cosmic order, and you'd face every danger at once, teeth and claws converging from all sides. The Greek chimera took this logic further, weaving fire, earth, and venom into a single beast. Her lion's head roared with the chaos of war, her goat's body clung to cliffs like landslides lying in wait, and her serpent's tail struck with the suddenness of plague. For Bronze Age villagers, she was a living metaphor for how disasters rarely come alone. A failed harvest might bring famine, then bandits, then disease, just as the chimera's many forms attacked in relentless succession. Even her death at Bellerophon's hands carried a lesson. Overcoming such threats required more than strength. It demanded strategy, divine favor, and the humility to know some forces can't be faced alone. Then there's the Sphinx, her human face masking a lion's body, her riddles more lethal than claws. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening? The answer, man's journey from cradle to grave, wasn't just a puzzle. It was a mirror held up to life's unpredictability. One misstep, one moment of arrogance like Oedipus's, and the ground could crumble beneath you. Hybrids like this didn't just guard places, they guarded truths, forcing humans to confront the fragile balance of their existence. Far across the world, the Navajo spoke of skinwalkers, shapeshifters who blurred the line between human and beast. These weren't mere monsters but cautionary tales about power's corruption. A shaman who turned his gifts toward harm didn't just become a wolf or owl, he became something unnatural, a violation of the sacred bond between species. The terror of skinwalkers wasn't just in their claws but in their origin. They were reminders that some boundaries exist for a reason, and crossing them unraveled both the individual and the community. So why do hybrids dominate monster lore more than pure creatures? Perhaps because life's greatest threats are rarely singular. Droughts bring famine, wars breed pestilence, greed erodes trust, chaos compounds. A lion is fearsome, but a lion with wings and a scorpion's tail. That's the universe itself turning against you. These fused monstrosities distilled the interconnected dangers of survival into forms too visceral to ignore. Yet for all their terror, hybrids had rules. They could be outwitted, appeased, or even bargained with, like the undead, who often represented breaches too grave to mend. When a corpse sat up in its grave, it wasn't just a monster. It was a social contract torn apart, a promise between the living and the dead left unfulfilled. From the Mesopotamian Ekamu spirits of the improperly buried, to the European revenants who stalked those who wronged them, the undead enforced what hybrids merely warned against. Some lines once crossed couldn't be uncrossed. The undead have always been more than just monsters. They were the enforcers of society's deepest taboos. Take the Romanian strigoi, a corpse that rose when burial rites were neglected or the living spoke ill of the dead. Its vengeance wasn't random. It targeted families who'd broken sacred bonds, draining the life from those who'd failed in their duties. Half a world away, the Chinese Jiangxi hopped stiff-legged through villages, its limbs frozen in rigor mortis, hunting those who'd left ancestors improperly buried or wills unresolved. These weren't just scary stories, they were stark reminders that neglecting tradition could unleash literal nightmares. The Jiangxi's greenish pallor and funeral robes mirrored the decay of forgotten obligations, while the Strigoi's ability to shape-shift into animals reflected how quickly social order could unravel when respect for the dead faded. During Europe's plague years, vampire myths took on a darker communal role. When entire villages succumbed to the Black Death, survivors whispered of neighbors returning to drink the blood of the living, a grotesque metaphor for how disease consumed families whole. But these tales also served a chillingly practical purpose. Stories of vampires clawing from their graves justified exhumations, allowing terrified communities to identify and stake corpses with unnatural preservation, like flushed skin or blood at the lips, signs we now know as normal decomposition. In a time before germ theory, vampires became a way to explain contagion, transforming invisible pathogens into monsters you could at least try to fight. Medieval revenants, restless dead who haunted their kin, carried a different warning. Icelandic sagas tell of Glommer, a shepherd whose arrogance in life turned him into a draugr, a corpse so swollen with malice it could crush men with its weight. His story wasn't just about fear, it was a lesson in humility and the consequences of broken oaths. Similarly, Slavic tales of Upyri targeted those who died by suicide or violence, their spirits forced to walk until justice was served. These undead weren't mindless predators, they were cosmic balance keepers, ensuring no sin went unanswered. Even the vampire's infamous thirst for blood held layered meaning. In agrarian societies where a single bad harvest could doom a village, tales of creatures stealing life's vital fluid mirrored very real fears of scarcity. Romanian peasants buried suspected vampires with sickles at their necks, not just to decapitate them, but to symbolically reap them as they'd reap wheat, turning the monster into a perversion of the harvest itself. And consider this, when vampire panic swept 18th century Europe, they often coincided with famine years. Was the vampire a supernatural predator, or a manifestation of the landlord draining peasants dry through taxes and labor? The line between myth and social critique blurs. Now, imagine creatures even more colossal in their symbolism: giants. Where vampires personified intimate betrayals, giants loomed as embodiments of displaced peoples and untamed nature. Celtic Fomorians, misshapen and brutal, represented the chaotic forces the Tuatha De Danann had to conquer to establish order. Norse Jötnar weren't just enemies of the gods, they were the glaciers and storms that shaped Viking lives. Even Jack's beanstalk giant, with his fee fi fo fum, echoes ancient tensions between settlers and the indigenous peoples they displaced, his monstrous appetite a metaphor for land seizures. Giants didn't just tower over heroes, they stood for everything societies feared they couldn't control. Yet, unlike vampires whose curses were personal, giants often fell not to stakes or holy water, but to cunning and alliances, teaching that some threats require more than brute force to overcome. Giants stood as walking mountains of otherness, their very size marking them as alien to human society. In Norse sagas, the Jötnar weren't just frost giants. They were the embodiment of Scandinavia's merciless winters, their breath a blizzard, their footsteps avalanches waiting to happen. When Thor battled these towering beings, it wasn't merely a clash of strength. It was a symbolic struggle against the elements that could freeze a village solid overnight. Yet even these creatures held complexity. Some, like the wise giantess Grither, aided gods with prophecy and magic, revealing that giants weren't inherently evil, just forces beyond human control, as capricious as the weather itself. Welsh legends tell of Gogmagog, a giant hurled from a cliff by the invading Brutus, his fall mirroring the collapse of Britain's earlier inhabitants before Bronze Age newcomers. His name echoes through history as Gomagat, a figure of displaced indigenous peoples, his monstrous stature amplifying the guilt of conquest. Anthropologists note how discoveries of mammoth bones and dinosaur fossils may have fed these tales, ancient femurs mistaken for giant limbs, skulls with single nasal cavities inspiring Cyclops myths. But the deeper truth lies in what these stories reveal about societal fears. Giants became placeholders for anyone deemed too different, too rebellious, or too connected to a supplanted past. Consider the Cyclops, isolated in its cave, shunning the rules of hospitality that bound Greek society. When Odysseus blinds Polyphemus, it's not just a hero's triumph, it's a cautionary tale about the dangers of solitude and the social contract. The Cyclops' single eye, fixed in its socket, mirrors its narrow worldview, unable to see the value of community. Yet even here, there's nuance. Some scholars suggest Cyclops myths originated from blacksmith clans, their eye patches and solitary forges making them seem like one-eyed monsters to outsiders. The giant, then, wasn't always a villain, just someone operating outside familiar norms. This fear of the other took chilling turns in colonial narratives. When European settlers described Native American tribes as giants, they weren't just exaggerating, they were dehumanizing, turning entire cultures into monsters to justify displacement. Irish folklore, too, painted the pre-Celtic Tuatha De Danann as towering figures, their eventual shrinking into fairies reflecting the erasure of a conquered people. Giants in these contexts became scapegoats for collective guilt, their imagined brutality excusing real-world violence, but not all monsters were so easily categorized. Lurking at the edges of these tales were tricksters, creatures like Loki, the Norse shapeshifter, or the Native American coyote, who defied simple labels of good or evil. These beings thrived in moral gray areas, teaching through chaos rather than conquest. Where giants externalized fears, tricksters forced societies to question their own rules, proving that survival sometimes required bending rather than breaking the world's order. Tricksters danced through myths wearing masks of mischief, teaching civilizations not with brute force, but by turning the world upside down. The Native American coyote didn't just howl at the moon, he stole fire, outwitted bears, and even rearranged the stars, all while tripping over his own paws. His chaotic antics weren't just entertainment, they were survival lessons wrapped in laughter. When Coyote's greed led him to swallow a cloud only to burst apart, scattering rain across the desert, it wasn't just a cautionary tale. It showed how adaptability thrives where rigidity fails. Tribes from the plains to the southwest told these stories not to condemn chaos, but to celebrate its creative power, proving that sometimes the best way to face a storm is to dance in it. Across the Pacific, the Japanese kitsune wove a more delicate kind of chaos. These nine-tailed foxes could shapeshift into beautiful women or wise monks, rewarding those who showed humility while punishing arrogance with eerie precision. A merchant who hoarded rice might find his warehouse emptied by invisible paws, while a farmer who shared his last bowl might wake to a field suddenly ripe with barley. Kitsune blurred the line between monster and muse, their tricks exposing the consequences of human choices without a single drop of blood. Their magic wasn't just illusion. It was a mirror held up to society's imbalances, revealing how greed warps the soul while kindness restores it. Then there's Loki, the Norse shapeshifter whose lies unraveled the gods' plans only to weave them back stronger. When he orchestrated Baldur's death with a mistletoe dart, it wasn't mere cruelty, it forced the gods to confront their own fragility, proving that even divinity couldn't escape change. Loki's greatest trick, teaching that destruction could be a kind of creation. Without his schemes, there'd be no Thor's hammer, no golden walls of Asgard, no prophecies to spur the gods toward growth. His chaos wasn't senseless, it was the fire that tempered the blade, the storm that cleared the rot from the forest floor. What makes tricksters so unforgettable isn't just their cunning, it's how they balance horror with humor. Coyote's foolishness made his failures sting less, Kitsune's elegance turned their punishments into poetry, and Loki's wit kept his betrayals from feeling truly evil. They taught civilizations to laugh at their own flaws, making bitter truths easier to swallow, and in doing so, they became the most human of monsters, not because they were kind, but because they were flawed. They lied, they schemed, they stumbled, yet their stories endured because they echoed the messy reality of being alive, which raises a darker question. If tricksters reflect our cleverness, what of the monsters that embody our hidden shames? Every culture has them, creatures born not from chaos or nature, but from the parts of ourselves we bury deep. The doppelganger that stalks German folklore isn't just a copy of its victim. It's the embodiment of their unspoken regrets, a shadow self made flesh. In West Africa, the Ad's vampire doesn't just drink blood, it preys on those who have broken communal trust, its firefly form symbolizing how betrayal can flicker behind a friendly glow. These monsters didn't just frighten, they forced societies to stare into the abyss of their own potential for darkness. The genius of tricksters was making humanity's flaws feel survivable, even funny. But shadow monsters served a grimmer purpose. They whispered that some battles weren't against external forces, but against the chaos within. Where Coyote taught adaptability, the doppelganger warned of self-deception. Where Kitsune rewarded virtue, the Adze punished its absence. Together, they formed a paradox, monsters that celebrated human ingenuity while exposing its limits, creatures as contradictory as the people who imagined them. Doppelgängers lurk in the corners of folklore not as mere monsters, but as reflections of our most unsettling truth that the greatest threat might be ourselves. Germanic legends describe these eerie doubles appearing to individuals as harbingers of doom, their silent presence signaling impending death or disaster. But look closer and you'll find a more chilling interpretation. The doppelganger wasn't just an omen, it was the embodiment of repressed desires, the shadow self clawing its way into the light. When a 19th century noblewoman supposedly encountered her own double calmly knitting by the fireplace moments before her sudden death, the real horror wasn't the apparition itself, but what it represented: the parts of her psyche she'd refused to acknowledge, now materializing to claim their due. This theme of internal duality echoes through Slavic tales of the leshy, forest spirits who mirrored the emotions of those who crossed their paths. A traveler filled with rage might meet a leshy towering and furious, while one consumed by sorrow would find it weeping among the trees. These beings weren't just guardians of the wilderness, they were living Rorschach tests, revealing how our inner states shape the world we perceive. Psychologist Carl Jung would later call this the shadow archetype, the suppressed aspects of ourselves that, when ignored, distort reality into something monstrous. The Leshy's shifting form was a warning: enter the wild with chaos in your heart, and you'll face it reflected back tenfold. Modern horror films like Jordan Peele's Us have resurrected this ancient fear with terrifying precision. The tethered doppelgängers living underground aren't just physical copies, they're the unfulfilled potential, the rage of neglect-given flesh. Their violence isn't random, it's the inevitable backlash of a self divided. This trope transcends culture, from Japanese yokai that mimic human speech to West African abiku spirits born only to die and torment their families. These stories all whisper the same uncomfortable question: what happens when the parts of ourselves we've locked away finally break free? Yet for all their menace, shadow monsters serve a paradoxical purpose. They force confrontation with truths too painful to admit, like the German folktale of the Waldemar's doppelganger, where a knight's double exposes his secret cowardice during battle. The doppelganger's appearance wasn't the tragedy, it was the knight's refusal to integrate this flaw that doomed him. Similarly, the Slavic Rusalka, a water spirit born from the souls of wronged women, didn't just drown men out of spite. Her song lured those who resembled her oppressors, turning their own guilt into a weapon. These creatures punished not for cruelty's sake, but to enforce a brutal kind of accountability. Perhaps that's why cultures worldwide created guardian monsters to patrol sacred spaces, not just to keep humans out, but to keep their shadows in check. The Greek Sphinx devoured those who couldn't answer her riddle, a metaphor for the self-knowledge required to approach the divine. Norse tales of the bridge guardian Modgunr, who questioned souls crossing into the afterlife, served the same purpose. No one could pass until they'd reckoned with their own story. These beings were the final gatekeepers, ensuring that only those who'd faced their inner darkness could access what lay beyond. So the next time you hear a myth about a double or a shapeshifter, ask yourself, is it really a monster or a mirror? These stories endure not because they frighten us, but because they force us to confront the most terrifying frontier of all, the wilderness within. And as we'll see, the guardians standing at the threshold between worlds understood this better than anyone. Guardian monsters stood at the threshold between worlds, their terrifying visages carved into temple gates and palace walls, not to harm, but to protect. The Assyrian Lamassu, with its bull's body, eagle's wings, and human face, loomed over city entrances, a hybrid of strength, speed, and wisdom. These colossal statues weren't just decorations. They were supernatural sentinels, their very presence a warning to chaos. You shall not pass. But the Lamashu's paradox was deliberate. Its 5 legs, appearing stationary from the front, striding from the side, symbolized its power to exist in 2 realms at once, guarding the physical and spiritual alike. To approach one was to feel both awe and safety, as if the monster's glare could freeze evil in its tracks. China's Kilin, a chimera of dragon scales and deer-like grace, served a similar purpose in the silence of tombs. Unlike Western gargoyles, which warded off evil with grotesque menace, the Kilin radiated serene authority. Its very footsteps were said to avoid crushing even a blade of grass, yet it could summon fire to incinerate the unworthy. Ming Dynasty emperors placed these creatures along spirit paths, trusting them to distinguish honest mourners from grave robbers. The Kilin's duality was its genius, a monster so attuned to moral purity that its violence felt like divine justice. The Greeks took a fiercer approach. Gorgon heads with their serpent hair and petrifying stares, adorned shields, temple pediments, and even household oil lamps. These weren't just images of Medusa, they were apotropaic weapons, turning the monster's curse into a shield. Sailors painted Gorgonaeans on their ships' prows, transforming a symbol of terror into a talisman against storms and pirates. The message was clear: sometimes you fight fire with fire. By harnessing the Gorgon's power, mortals borrowed her lethality to guard their own fragile order. What's striking about these guardians is how they blurred the line between divine and monstrous. The Lamashu wasn't just a beast, it was a servant of the gods. The Kilin's horn mirrored the unicorn's purity but carried the weight of celestial judgment. Even the Gorgon, for all her fury, was once a beautiful priestess wronged by the gods. This interplay reveals a profound truth. Civilizations often dressed their protectors in monstrous trappings because true safety required something beyond human understanding. A lion might guard a gate, but only a creature that defied nature could repel the unseen envy, deceit, the restless dead. Yet when societies faced collapse, even these mighty guardians couldn't hold back the tide. As crops failed and empires crumbled, new monsters emerged from the wreckage, not as protectors but as manifestations of hunger itself. The Welsh Fank, a lake-dwelling beast, grew ravenous during famines, its appetite mirroring the desperation of starving villagers. Norse legends spoke of the Drekar, serpentine ships prowling coastlines not for gold but for grain. These creatures didn't guard sacred spaces. They exposed the fragility of all spaces when the social contract unraveled. Where Lamashu stood firm, famine-born monsters slithered through the cracks, reminding us that terror could be both shield and specter, depending on who held the key. When winter winds howled through Algonquian forests, starving villagers whispered of the Wendigo, not just a monster, but the embodiment of hunger itself. This gaunt creature, with lips chewed bloody from its own craving and heart encased in ice, didn't just stalk the wilderness. It was born from desperation, a human transformed by the unthinkable act of cannibalism during famine. The Wendigo wasn't merely a predator, it was a walking taboo, a warning that survival at the cost of community would erase one's humanity. Arctic tribes knew the stakes. In years when caribou herds vanished and snow buried food caches, the line between sustenance and sin grew perilously thin. The Wendigo myth enforced a brutal ethic: better to starve together than feast alone. Half a world away, under scorching desert suns, Arabic folklore told of ghouls slithering through dunes to prey on stranded travelers. These shape-shifting horrors didn't just consume flesh, they mimicked human voices, luring victims with the echoes of lost loved ones. Like the Wendigo, ghouls thrived in landscapes where scarcity ruled. their deception mirroring the hallucinations of thirst-crazed wanderers. Bedouin tales warned against hoarding water skins or abandoning caravan duties, as such selfish acts could summon these creatures. Both myths served the same grim purpose: to codify survival rules through terror, ensuring cooperation when resources dwindled. By the 19th century, colonial doctors documented cases of Wendigo psychosis, a condition where starving individuals reportedly developed an insatiable craving for human flesh. While modern scholars debate its clinical reality, the phenomenon reveals how these stories functioned as societal safeguards. To accuse someone of turning Wendigo was to isolate a threat before it could spread, like amputating a frostbitten limb. Similarly, ghouls in 1001 Nights weren't just monsters. They were narrative devices teaching listeners to share provisions and honor burial rites, lest they invite something worse than death. The genius of hunger monsters lies in their duality. They're both the consequence of scarcity and the enforcers of its ethics. The Wendigo's icy heart symbolized the emotional numbness required to betray one's kin, while the ghoul's mimicry reflected how desperation could distort identity itself. These creatures didn't just punish, they revealed the unspoken contracts binding societies together. Hoard food during a blizzard, and you risked becoming what you feared. Ignore a stranger's cry in the desert, and you might next hear your own voice echoing back from the ghoul's throat. Yet as lethal as hunger monsters were, they paled beside the specters that arrived with pestilence. When entire villages succumbed to fever, folklore conjured plague demons, like the Babylonian Lamashtu, who crept into homes to strangle infants, or the Slavic Mara, whose breath spread sickness like fog. Unlike Wendigos or ghouls, these beings didn't wait for weakness to strike. They thrived on contact, their very presence a reminder that some threats couldn't be outlasted, only endured. Where hunger monsters punished individual failings, plague demons exposed humanity's collective fragility, turning coughs into curses and burial shrouds into their banners. When fever swept through South Indian villages, mothers painted turmeric paste across their children's brows not just as medicine, but as an offering to Mariamman, the goddess whose very sweat could birth smallpox pustules or dry them to scabs. Here was divinity wearing a monster's mask, a bringer of plagues who also held their cure. Her temples stood at the edges of settlements, places where the sick could beg for mercy without risking contagion. Devotees knew the paradox: to approach her was to risk death, yet to ignore her was to invite certain suffering. This duality wasn't unique. Across continents and eras, cultures personified pestilence as entities both fearsome and necessary, their wrath inseparable from their power to heal. Jewish folklore told of Dybbuk's during the Black Death, souls so desperate to escape mass graves they clung to the living, whispering through fevered lips. These weren't mindless possessors, they were victims demanding proper burial, their unrest a protest against the anonymity of plague pits. A Dybbuk's rattle in a survivor's throat wasn't just possession, it was memory refusing to be buried. European art of the same era depicted pestilence as the fourth horseman, his skeletal horse trampling bishops and beggars alike. But look closer, his robe often bore celestial patterns, a twisted reminder that epidemics, like stars, followed cycles beyond human control. Physicians of the time armored themselves in monstrosity to fight monsters. Their beaked plague masks, stuffed with lavender and camphor, transformed healers into hybrid creatures part human, part carrion bird. The long beak wasn't just filtration. It created psychological distance, turning doctors into something otherworldly enough to face death daily. In Venice, these masked figures carried white rods to measure graves, their very presence marking the boundary between order and chaos. Today's pandemic lore echoes these ancient patterns. Early COVID-era stories of super spreaders mirrored medieval tales of typhoid Marys, while memes of the virus as a crown-wearing invader recalled personified pestilence. Modern plague demons don't ride horses, they hitch rides on grocery carts and subway rails, their invisibility making them more terrifying than any horned figure. Yet for all their terror, pestilent spirits share one trait with the monsters lurking beyond our atmosphere. They thrive in the unknown. Just as eclipses birthed sky serpents in Norse myths, and comet tails became the lashing tails of Chinese sky dragons, plagues remind us how quickly the familiar can turn alien. When the moon blotted out the sun, ancient Babylonians saw Tiamat's return. When fever stole a child's breath, villagers saw Mariammon's passing shadow. Both were attempts to name the unnameable, to wrestle meaning from chaos, even if that meaning wore a monster's face. Now, consider the celestial beasts that turned cosmic events into narratives. The same cultures that feared plague demons also charted the heavens with creatures like Rahu, the Hindu eclipse demon whose severed head devours the sun. His story, born from deception, punished by decapitation, yet immortal, mirrors the paradox of pestilence itself, a force that can be temporarily vanquished but never truly destroyed. As we'll see, these sky-bound monsters didn't just explain eclipses or comets, they mapped humanity's place in a universe far vaster than any earthly epidemic. When the sun vanished without warning over ancient China, people knew the celestial dragon had struck again. They rushed into streets, banging pots and drums to scare the beast into coughing up its stolen light. A ritual born from the belief that eclipses were battles between heavenly creatures and cosmic order. This dragon wasn't alone. Across the globe, cultures personified eclipses as monstrous disruptions. Vikings saw sky wolves chasing the sun. Hindus envisioned the decapitated demon Ra, who's swallowing it whole, while the Pomo tribe of North America spoke of a bear striding across the heavens, its massive paws blotting out the light. These weren't just stories, they were survival strategies. For farmers planting crops or sailors navigating by stars, an eclipse wasn't celestial trivia, it was a potential catastrophe. If the sun didn't return, crops would fail, tides would turn, and time itself might unravel. West African tales took a different approach. Anansi the trickster spider didn't just witness eclipses, he caused them. In one legend, he traps the sun in his web, plunging the world into darkness until the gods bargain for its release. Unlike the Chinese dragon's mindless hunger, Anansi's theft was deliberate, a reminder that even celestial bodies weren't beyond a trickster's reach. His story carried a sly lesson. Chaos could be negotiated with if you had the wit to try. Astronomers now recognize these myths as attempts to explain the unexplainable. Before science charted the moon's shadow, an eclipse felt like divine punishment or a monster's whim. The Aztec Tzitzimime, skeletal star demons who descended during solar eclipses, embodied this terror. They weren't just symbols, they were scapegoats for failed harvests or stillborn children, giving tangible form to humanity's helplessness against the cosmos. Why did sky monsters feel more immense than their earthly counterparts? Perhaps because their domain was infinite. A wolf in the forest could be hunted, but a wolf made of stars. That was a threat beyond spears or fire. Celestial creatures operated on scales that dwarfed human concerns. Their hunger could swallow light itself. Their battles could shake the seasons. Unlike trolls under bridges or vampires in crypts, they couldn't be avoided or appeased with local rituals. They demanded universal attention, uniting disparate cultures under shared awe. Yet for all their grandeur, these sky beasts had earthly roots. The Mesopotamian Tiamat, whose body became the heavens after her defeat, linked cosmic chaos to very real fears of floods and storms. When her celestial form darkened the sun, it wasn't just an astronomical event, it was the primordial mother's shadow falling across her children once more. Now descend from the heavens to where even starlight fears to tread the underworld. If sky monsters represented forces beyond human control, their subterranean counterparts guarded the ultimate boundary, the one between life and death. Egyptian Ammit lurked by Osiris scales, her crocodile jaws poised to erase unworthy souls, while Greek Cerberus' three heads sniffed for living intruders in Hades. These guardians didn't just frighten, they enforced the universe's most sacred law. What enters the realm of the dead must stay there. Their monstrous forms were the final warning, the last chance to turn back before crossing the line even heroes couldn't uncross. Beneath the gates of the underworld, where shadows whisper and mortal souls falter, one creature stands sentinel across cultures, the Hellhound. The Greeks feared Cerberus, his three heads bristling with serpents, his slavering jaws ready to crush any living thing daring to enter or any spirit attempting to flee. But for the Aztecs, death wore a different canine face. Xolotl, the dog-headed god, didn't just guard the afterlife. He guided souls through its terrors, his twin role as lightning deity reflecting the sudden, transformative nature of death itself. Where Cerberus enforced boundaries with brute force, Xolotl carried a torch, illuminating the path to Mictlan, the Aztec underworld. This duality reveals a profound truth. Dogs didn't just menace the dying, they mediated the journey, their loyalty transcending the grave. British folklore brims with black dog omens, spectral hounds like Black Shuck, whose glowing eyes foretold doom in coastal villages. Witnesses described hearing his paws scrape against churchyard stones before storms or plagues struck. Yet even these apparitions carried ambiguity. Some tales told of Shuck protecting lone travelers from thieves, his growls scaring off bandits in the night. Like Xolotl, these creatures weren't merely harbingers of death. They were its interpreters, helping communities make sense of sudden loss. When a fisherman vanished at sea, the sight of a black dog pacing the shore offered a grim but comforting narrative. Death hadn't been random but foretold. Psychopomp monsters, those guiding spirits, softened death's terror by giving it form. A dying Viking might glimpse Garma, the blood-stained hound of Hell's realm, and know his fate was sealed not by chaos but by the god's design. Modern near-death accounts echo this instinct. Survivors often describe encountering luminous animals, wolves made of light, stags with glowing antlers leading them toward thresholds of warmth or pulling them back to their bodies. These light beasts serve the same purpose as Xolotl or Garma. They translate the incomprehensible into something familiar, a loyal companion for the ultimate journey. Why do dogs dominate underworld myths? Their very biology holds clues. Canines' acute senses let them detect illness before humans, an uncanny foresight ancient cultures linked to prophecy. Their vigilance made them natural guardians, whether of flocks or funeral rites. But deeper still, dogs embody the paradox of death itself, fierce yet tender, final yet transitional. A grave unearthed in ancient Mesopotamia held a human skeleton cradled by a dog's bones, a burial that whispers across millennia. Even in grief, we trust them to lead us home. Yet not all underworld monsters offered guidance. Some existed solely to enforce cosmic justice. The Persian Sinvat Bridge stretched over Hell's abyss, its surface narrowing to a blade's edge for the wicked. There, no gentle psychopomp awaited, only the demon Visage, who flung the unworthy into darkness. Chinese folklore spoke of ox head and horse face, jailers of Diu's courts, whose animalistic forms mirrored the beasts of burden-condemned souls became. These creatures weren't guides but reckoners, ensuring no sin went unpunished. Their brutality served a grim comfort. In a universe where kings and peasants alike could cheat mortal justice, death's monsters leveled the scales. From guiding spirits to avenging jailers, these beings reveal humanity's oldest struggle, not just to understand death, but to imagine it as something with rules, even mercy. When the next world feels as ordered as this one, its terrors become bearable, and perhaps that's the greatest gift these monsters gave, not just fear, but the fragile hope that even in darkness there are paths and sometimes pause to light the way. Thick with the scent of burning sulfur, the Aranais descended upon oath-breakers, their serpent hair hissing as they drove mortals mad with guilt. These Greek avengers, sometimes called the Furies, weren't mere monsters. They were living curses, embodiments of broken promises, their very existence ensuring that some sins couldn't be buried, even in death. When a son murdered his mother, as Orsts did, the Aranais didn't just punish, they haunted, whispering in his ears until madness became his prison. Their justice wasn't about fairness, it was about balance, restoring cosmic order drop by drop of torment. Unlike modern courts, which weigh evidence and intent, these winged horrors operated on pure moral arithmetic. Break a sacred oath, and their claws would find you, whether you hid in a palace or a pauper's grave. Across the Pacific, Japan's Onryo wielded a quieter, colder vengeance. Take the legendary Oiwa, betrayed by her husband and left to die in agony. When she returned as a specter, her disfigured face peeling like rotting parchment, she didn't just target her murderer, she unraveled his entire world, turning allies against him until he died screaming. While the Aranais served divine law, Onryo like Sadako or Oiwa became the law, their rage so potent it bent reality itself. A single grudge could flood villages, summon plagues, or crack mirrors miles away. These spirits didn't need trials, their suffering was evidence enough, their wrath the sentence. What's chilling isn't just their brutality, but what they reveal about premodern justice. In societies without forensic science or police forces, monsters filled the gap. The Aranais punished what courts couldn't: broken familial bonds, betrayed trust, sins that left no physical scars. Onryo thrived in Edo-era Japan, where women had little legal recourse against abusive husbands or corrupt lords. Their stories spread like warning fires, oppress the powerless, and even death won't shield you. Today's true crime obsessions and vigilante films, from Death Note to Promising Young Woman, echo this ancient hunger for moral symmetry. When systems fail, we still whisper something ought to come for them. Yet these avengers shared a darker kinship with forces no society could control: natural disasters. The Aranais' shrieks mimicked earthquake tremors. Onryo-induced tsunamis mirrored real waves swallowing coastal towns. After the 2011 Tohoku earthquake, some survivors swore they saw spectral women in soaked kimonos staring from the wreckage, a modern twist on the Yubium, ghosts of mothers lost in childbirth who warned of coming calamities. Whether as vengeful spirits or storm-bringers, monsters became the language of helplessness, giving voice to humanity's oldest realization. Some forces don't care about fairness, only consequences. And when the ground shakes or the sea rises, we still glimpse their shadows, not in winged demons or pale specters, but in the uncanny way disaster strips away illusions of control. The monsters didn't vanish, they just traded claws for fault lines, curses for hurricanes, reminding us that nature, like vengeance, follows its own laws. When storm clouds blackened the skies over the Great Lakes, the Ojibwe people knew the Thunderbird was locked in battle once more. With wings that churned hurricanes and eyes flashing lightning, this colossal raptor dove into the waters to grapple with Miss Hypeshoe, the monstrous underwater panther whose lashing tail stirred whirlpools. Their eternal struggle wasn't just myth, it was a masterclass in meteorology. the Thunderbird's triumphant flaps brought life-giving rains, while Miss Hypeshoe's retaliatory surges explained flash floods. For tribes navigating the unpredictable Midwest, this cosmic duel transformed terrifying weather into a story they could track, interpret, and even prepare for. Fishermen reading the clouds would whisper, "The Thunderbird is hunting today," steering their canoes ashore before storms hit. Half a world away, Hindu villagers recounted how the boar god Varaha plunged his tusks into the cosmic ocean to lift the drowning earth, a myth that geologists now recognize may echo ancestral memories of post-glacial flooding. When the last ice age retreated 12,000 years ago, rising seas swallowed entire coastlines. Varaha's heroic heave didn't just restore land, it encoded survival strategies for monsoon seasons, teaching communities to seek higher ground. Similar stories ripple across cultures. The Norse Jörmungandr, the world serpent whose writhing triggered earthquakes, finds eerie parallels in modern seismic maps showing fault lines coiling like serpentine bodies. What's striking isn't just the accuracy of these metaphors, but their therapeutic power. After the 1700 Cascadia earthquake, a magnitude 9 catastrophe that permanently lowered Pacific Northwest coastlines, the Maka tribe spoke of a battle between Thunderbird and a whale so violent it shook the ocean floor. Modern seismologists confirmed their account through sediment layers, proving oral traditions preserved precise geological data for centuries. These stories did more than explain disasters, they made them survivable. By personifying tectonic forces as creatures, trauma became something you could outwit, appease, or even bargain with. The genius of cataclysm monsters lies in their duality. They're both the destroyers and the teachers. When the Maori described the god Uamoko stirring in his mother's womb to cause quakes, they also passed down construction techniques, flexible reed buildings that swayed rather than collapsed. Japanese tsunami stones, some dating back 600 years, bear dragon carvings warning descendants not to build below their markers. Even the Bible's Leviathan, that primordial sea beast, taught ancient sailors to respect the ocean's moods through proverbs about its untamable nature. These tales didn't just recount disasters, they drilled them. Inuit children learned to spot thin ice by hearing of the palrejuk, a creature that lurked beneath weak flows. Philippine folklore's Bacanawa, a moon-swallowing serpent, taught coastal tribes to associate eclipses with extreme tides. Every monster carried practical lessons in its claws: when to evacuate, where to build, how to store food for lean times. Today, seismologists collaborate with indigenous elders, realizing these stories contain millennia of hazard date, and not as sterile charts, but as gripping sagas our ancestors couldn't afford to forget. Now consider this: the same cultures that envisioned earthquakes as serpents or storms as battling beasts also excelled at disaster preparedness. Their myths weren't escapism, they were the original emergency manuals, written in a language of scales and thunder that even children could understand. In a world before satellites or seismographs, these creatures were the first early warning systems, their imagined roars carrying very real survival wisdom. Deep beneath the Arctic ice, where hunters risked their lives for a single seal's breath, the Inuit told of Sedna, a goddess betrayed by her father, her fingers hacked off as she clung to their kayak. But those severed digits didn't just sink into darkness, they twisted into the first seals, their flippers still bearing the ghost of human hands. This wasn't just a horror story. It was a survival manual carved from ice. Sedna's wrath taught hunters to respect their prey, waste no part of the kill, honor the animal's spirit, or face her storms that could freeze the sea solid. Her monstrous form, half-drowned woman, half-marine beast, was a reminder that nature's gifts came with conditions. The lesson was clear: survival wasn't just about skill, it was about reciprocity with the very forces that could destroy you. In the shadow of Slavic birch forests, another kind of tutor lurked in her chicken-legged hut. Baba Yaga's iron teeth gnashed not just to frighten children, but to forge them. When she demanded a traveler clean her filthy hearth or sought a mountain of seeds overnight, these weren't arbitrary torments, they were trials distilled from generations of hard-won wisdom. The hearth symbolized the heart of the home. Keeping it clean meant tending to community. The seeds represented the painstaking patience needed to sort edible grains from poisonous mimics. Fail and her oven awaited. Succeed and she might gift a charmed comb or whispered secret, tools for the next ordeal. Baba Yaga's cruelty had purpose. She didn't just test strength, but adaptability, the ability to think like the forest itself, where rules shifted like fog. Polynesian navigators faced their own monstrous mentors in the shark gods. These weren't mindless predators, but enforcers of sacred law. In Hawaii, the god Kamoholi could guide lost canoes to land or drag the disrespectful into the depths. Fishermen learned to read his movements. A shark circling counter-clockwise meant storms brewing. A dorsal fin cutting through waves at dawn signaled safe passage. The ocean's dangers were encoded in his behavior, lessons passed down not as lectures, but as legends where a single misstep could summon rows of gleaming teeth. These stories held navigational charts in their jaws, teaching star paths through the guise of terror. What unites Sedna, Baba Yaga, and the shark gods is their brutal pedagogy. They didn't coddle, they curated crises, forcing learners to internalize lessons that meant life or death. Forget a hunting ritual, and Sedna's storms left your family starving. Misread Baba Yaga's riddles, and her fence of skulls warned of consequences. Disrespect the shark god, and the sea became your tomb. These monsters were the original survival instructors, their stories the ancient equivalent of flight simulators, controlled environments where failure carried the weight of imagination rather than reality. Now consider how this mentorship evolved in rites of passage. When Maasai youths faced the lion hunt or Amazonian tribes ingested hallucinogens under a shaman's watch, they weren't just proving courage, they were stepping into stories where the monster and the teacher wore the same face. The lion wasn't merely a beast to kill, but a spirit to negotiate with. The visions weren't just trials, but dialogues with the divine. These rituals preserved the monster's core function, to terrify, yes, but more importantly, to transform. The child who entered the dark forest might emerge with a wolf's cunning or a bear's resilience, not despite the monster, but because of it. The brilliance of these mythic mentors lies in their refusal to be kind. They taught as nature teaches, through consequences, not comfort. A modern student might forget a math formula and relearn it later, but forget Sedna's laws and your village went hungry. Baba Yaga's oven wasn't just a threat, it was the unforgiving reality of winter made manifest. Perhaps that's why these stories endure. They remind us that the deepest wisdom often wears sharp teeth, and the most vital lessons come not from gentle guides, but from the creatures that demand we rise to meet them. On the sun-scorched savannas of East Africa, young Maasai warriors once stood barefoot before a wounded lion, spear in hand. This wasn't just a hunt, it was a ritual theater where the line between boyhood and manhood hinged on a single encounter. To earn their scarlet shukas, initiates had to confront the beast alone, not just to prove courage, but to absorb its essence. The lion's roar wasn't merely a threat, it was the voice of adulthood itself, demanding they shed hesitation like a second skin. Anthropologists note how these trials mirrored the lion's own coming of age, where young males must challenge the pride's patriarch or face exile. The message was clear: maturity isn't given, it's taken from the jaws of something fiercer than yourself. Half a world away, in the labyrinthine halls of Knossos, Athenian youths faced a different kind of beast. The Minotaur wasn't just a monster, it was the embodiment of adolescent confusion, its twisting home reflecting the chaos of growing up. Theseus didn't just slay the bull-headed horror, he unraveled the maze, turning disorientation into order. Greek scholars suggest the labyrinth's corridors symbolized societal expectations, constricting, disorienting, yet ultimately navigable with the right tools. The crimson thread Ariadne offered wasn't mere string. It was the fragile tether of tradition guiding youths through the dark. From the Amazon's jaguar trials to Celtic vision quests where teens fasted until spirit animals appeared, cultures weaponized monsters to forge adulthood. The Satare Mawe tribe's bullet ant gloves woven with venomous insects left initiates shaking for days, their swollen hands mimicking the claws of the jungle's deadliest predators. Anthropologist David Whitley traces ritual scarring across continents, noting how Kelabit tribes in Borneo carved leopard spot patterns into skin, while Iroquois warriors bore facial marks resembling bear scratches. These weren't just decorations, they were bodily receipts proving you'd traded blood with the unknown. Why did monsters dominate these transitions? Psychologist Maria Giovanna Parisi points to the brain's plasticity during puberty, when terrifying experiences etch deeper neural pathways. A boy who overcame a lion attack didn't just gain status, he rewired his fight or flight instincts. The monster served as a living benchmark. Survive its teeth, and you've proven mastery over your own burgeoning chaos. Even modern rites, military boot camps, fraternity hazings echo this primal logic, substituting drill sergeants or paddles for mythical beasts. Yet these trials weren't gender neutral. While Mossai youths battled lions, their sisters underwent immuater, a ceremonial cutting that mirrored the lion's bite in its visceral demand for resilience. Greek maidens approaching womanhood left honey cakes for the snake-tailed Lamia, a child-devouring demon whose story warned of motherhood's voracious sacrifices. In Japan, girls collected monstrous yokai illustrations in Hyakumonogatari games, confronting supernatural horrors to steel themselves for a society where a woman's reputation could be as fragile as the paper lanterns illuminating these rituals. The gender divide sharpens with creatures like the Mexican Cihuatateo spirits of women who died in childbirth, now stalking crossroads to steal children. Their skeletal faces and eagle claws embodied societal fears about female power unleashed by mortality. Contrast them with the Germanic Nachzara, male revenants who chewed their burial shrouds to bring plague, their destruction impersonal and epidemic. One monster personalized maternal loss, the other embodied communal devastation. These patterns reveal a brutal truth. Societies used monsters to sculpt gender roles long before psychology named the process. A boy facing the Minotaur learned to conquer confusion. A girl offering cakes to Lamia internalized the paradox of nurture and sacrifice. The beasts weren't just foes, they were the chisels carving cultural expectations into flesh and psyche alike. As we'll see, this gendered lens sharpens further when examining creatures that didn't just test initiates, but enforced societal boundaries. The mermaids luring sailors to their doom, or the incubi invading women's dreams weren't mere fantasies. They were cautionary tales policing desire itself. Medusa's serpentine locks weren't just a curse, they were a crown of rebellion. Once a beautiful priestess of Athena, her transformation into a gorgon after Poseidon's violation speaks volumes about ancient Greece's fear of female power. Turned into a monster for another god's crime, her petrifying gaze became the ultimate defense against male predation. Feminist scholars like Mary Beard point out how Medusa's decapitation by Perseus mirrors the silencing of women who dare to be ungovernable. Yet her severed head, still potent on Athena's shield, whispers a paradox. Even in defeat, her monstrousness wielded authority. Contrast this with Kali, the Hindu goddess who dances on corpses, her tongue lolling in fury, yet cradles devotees like a mother. Where Medusa's monstrosity was punishment, Kali's is celebration, destruction as an act of cosmic house-clearing, her wrath a form of love too vast for gentleness. La Llorona's wails along Latin American rivers tell a different story of gendered terror. Drowned by grief after killing her own children, sometimes by accident, sometimes in rage against a cheating lover, she becomes both cautionary tale and collective guilt. Her ghost doesn't just mourn, she drags others into the water, a chilling metaphor for how society punishes women who break maternal scripts. Folkloric versions shift tellingly. In some, she's an indigenous woman betrayed by a Spanish conquistador, making her a spectral indictment of colonialism's violence. The common thread, monstrous femininity as the price of stepping outside prescribed roles, whether as victim, rebel, or scorned lover. Contemporary artists are flipping these scripts. Margaret Atwood's Penelopiad recasts Odysseus' faithful wife as a chorus of hanged maids, their ghosts snarling the good wife narrative. Visual artist Camille Claudel sculpted Medusa not as a monster, but a woman mid-scream, her snakes like living hair caught in a wind of rage. Even Kali gets a modern makeover in Indian graphic novels, her skull necklace swapped for corporate CEOs, her sword slicing through glass ceilings. These retellings expose the real monsters, not the women labeled dangerous, but the systems that fear their untamed potential. So do these creatures reinforce norms or riot against them? The answer lies in who holds the pen. Original myths often framed female monsters as caution signs: stay small, stay silent, or end up like her. But reclaimed, they become war cries. Medusa's gaze, once a weapon of her isolation, now adorns feminist protest signs, turning her curse into a shield. Kali's wildness, once sanitized in colonial depictions, is resurrected in South Asian punk music as a symbol of anti-patriarchal fury. Even La Llorona gets new life in Chicana poetry, her lament transformed into a ballad for all the women history drowned. This tension between warning and empowerment bleeds into our final category, taboo monsters. Just as gendered beasts policed social roles, creatures like the werewolf or vampire enforced cultural boundaries, but that's a moonlit path for another tale. Beneath the swirling currents of New Zealand's sacred rivers, the Taniwa waits scales glinting like wet obsidian, eyes reflecting centuries of tribal law. To the Maori, these serpentine guardians weren't just myths. They were the living embodiment of tapu, the sacred prohibitions that wove society together. Disturb a burial ground or fish in forbidden waters, and the Taniwa's coils would drag you under, not out of malice but to restore balance. Their violence carried purpose. A single drowning could teach an entire village to respect boundaries visible only to the ancestors. This wasn't superstition. It was ecological law disguised as monstrosity. Tribes knew which river bends hid undertows or which forest sheltered toxic plants, knowledge encoded in the Taniwa's lurking presence. The monster didn't just punish, it marked danger zones with teeth and legend. Meanwhile, in the scorching deserts of pre-Islamic Arabia, jinn whispered through abandoned ruins and trash-strewn alleys. Unlike European demons, these beings weren't inherently evil. They were creatures of smokeless fire, drawn to moral and physical decay. A jinn squatting in a neglected latrine or a derelict shrine wasn't just haunting, it was mirroring human negligence. Islamic scholars like Ibn Kathir warned that jinn thrived where people broke taboos, leaving hair unburied after haircuts, engaging in illicit sex near graveyards, or hoarding wealth without charity. The jinn's invisibility made them perfect enforcers unseen until their punishments manifested as sudden illnesses or madness, forcing communities to interrogate their own transgressions. Food taboos birthed their own monstrous watchers. Jewish folklore's dibbuks often possessed those who violated kosher laws. Their choking fits a physical manifestation of spiritual contamination. In India, the Pisacha, a flesh-hungry demon born from wasted food, stalked those who discarded meals during famine. Even the act of cooking could summon guardians. Aztec tales describe the Cihuatateo, the spirits of women who died in childbirth, descending at crossroads to steal poorly prepared tamales. These monsters didn't just scare, they policed the line between sustenance and sacrilege, turning every meal into a potential moral test. Freud would argue these creatures are society's ID-made monstrous repressed desires and fears clawing their way into myth. The Greek Impausa, with her bronze leg and donkey hoof, seduced travelers before devouring them, embodying the terror of female sexuality unleashed. Slavic Ruzalki, the ghosts of drowned unmarried women, lured men to watery graves with their beauty, their very existence a warning against unchecked lust. But monsters also punished the repression of desire. The Inuit Kalupalik, a green-skinned hag, kidnapped children whose parents were too stern, her sack a grotesque inversion of the maternal embrace. These taboo enforcers reveal a universal truth. Monsters are the shadows cast by culture's light. They thrive in the gaps between what's permitted and what's possible, their forms shifting to reflect each society's deepest anxieties. And just as they guarded forbidden spaces, other creatures embodied the terror of transformation itself, where the boundaries weren't just crossed but obliterated. The Yi-Noldlushii slinks through Navajo nightmares not as a simple monster, but as a violation written in flesh and bone. When a medicine man twists sacred rituals to wear another creature's skin, a wolf, a bear, even crow, he doesn't just transform, he unravels the very fabric of nature's laws. These skinwalkers embody the ultimate transgression, their hybrid forms screaming what should never be, that the boundaries between species aren't just crossed but erased. Anthropologist Bar Tolkien recorded elders whispering how the Yi-Noldlushii's eyes glow with human cunning even in animal form, a grotesque reminder that some lines, once blurred, can't be redrawn. Unlike European werewolves, whose transformations often stem from curses or full moons, skinwalkers choose their monstrosity, weaponizing the sacred for personal power. Their horror lies not in the teeth or claws, but in the knowing corruption of balance itself. Across the Atlantic, medieval werewolves howled a different kind of warning. In French chronicles like the Bisclavret, a nobleman trapped in wolf form retains his human mind but loses control of his body, his violence escalating with each lunar cycle. Here, the terror isn't about violating nature's order, but about humans confronting the beast within. A 12th century legal text from Ireland even prescribed exile for suspected werewolves, not because they were seen as supernatural, but because their rages mirrored the unchecked aggression of mercenaries and outlaws. Where skinwalkers represented deliberate sacrilege, werewolves symbolized society's fear of its own latent savagery, the kind that could turn a neighbor into a predator under the right or wrong conditions. Now picture a selkie shedding her sealskin on a moonlit Scottish beach. Unlike the skinwalker's grotesque melding or the werewolf's painful metamorphosis, her transformation is fluid, natural, until a human steals her pelt, trapping her in a forced marriage. These Celtic seal women don't just mourn their lost skins, they languish in homesickness, their very souls yearning for the sea. Folklorists interpret selkie tales as coded narratives of colonization, where indigenous coastal peoples watched their traditions and identities stripped away by invaders. The horror here isn't in the transformation itself, but in its irreversibility. A selkie might escape if she finds her hidden skin, but generations of cultural erasure. That's a spell far harder to break. Biologists offer a startling lens for these myths. Dr. Sharon Gursky-Doyen notes how real-world hybrid animals like Liger's lion-tiger crosses or Zonki's zebra-donkey mixes often suffer sterility or health defects, their bodies rebelling against unnatural unions. Ancient peoples likely witnessed similar anomalies, sparking tales of creatures punished for defying categorical lines. Even today, the uncanny valley affect our revulsion at humanoid robots that are almost, but not quite, lifelike hints at how deeply we're wired to fear categorical ambiguity. A static monster like a dragon is terrifying, yes, but a being that flickers between forms, that strikes at our primal need to classify and control the world around us. Which brings us to power's darkest alchemy, when rulers invoked monsters like the Habsburg dynasty commissioning art of their enemies as literal demons. They weren't just slandering opponents. They were weaponizing the deepest human instinct that what we can't categorize, we must destroy. The witch trials didn't burn women for being evil. They burned them for being unreadable, their knowledge and autonomy making them as fluid and frightening as any shapeshifter. In the end, perhaps that's why transformation terrifies more than any fang or claw, because it proves, in scales and fur and shifting skin, that no order is permanent, no boundary unbreakable. And if a man can become wolf or a seal can become wife, what else might be possible? The monsters whisper back everything and worse. Pharaohs of ancient Egypt didn't just rule, they coiled like serpents around their enemies, their stone effigies carved as colossal cobras poised to strike. The Urias, that golden serpent rearing from a king's brow, wasn't just decoration, it was a political weapon, its venomous gaze promising annihilation to dissenters. On temple walls, Ramses the Great trampled foes beneath his chariot, his figure morphing into a python squeezing the life from rebellions. But this serpentine symbolism cut both ways. When the Hyksos invaders were finally expelled, scribes depicted them as Apophis, the chaos serpent, slithering back into the darkness. The message was visceral: resist the crown, and you weren't just an enemy of the state, you were a force of primordial evil to be crushed underfoot. Aztec emperors wielded monsters with even sharper precision. The Tzitzimaim, skeletal star demons said to descend during solar eclipses, weren't merely cosmic horrors, they were propaganda tools. By linking political dissent to these celestial terrors, rulers framed opposition as an existential threat. A failed coup wasn't just treason, it risked summoning literal world-ending entities. The Florentine Codex records how Moctezuma's priests warned that rebels opened the door for the Tzitzimaim, turning dissent into a cosmic betrayal. This wasn't superstition, it was psychological warfare, weaponizing myth to paralyze resistance. Machiavelli's The Prince took this logic to its chilling extreme. His infamous manual didn't just advise rulers to act like monsters, it taught them to become monsters strategically. It is better to be feared than loved, he wrote, echoing the pharaoh's serpentine theatrics. His ideal prince wasn't a lion or a fox, but a shapeshifter, adopting brutality or benevolence as the moment demanded. Renaissance courts devoured his work, recognizing its truth: power thrives when it wears a monster's skin. Elizabeth I of England mastered this dance, portraying herself as Gloriana to her people, while Spanish Armada pamphlets depicted her as a dragon incinerating Catholic ships. Modern politics still breathes this ancient fire. Cold War cartoons mutated leaders into vampires or red-eyed robots, while today's social media reduces ideological foes to zombie hordes or parasitic creatures. The difference: speed and scale. Where pharaohs carved their narratives in stone, tweets and deepfakes spawn monsters in seconds. A protester becomes a rabid mob, a policy becomes a Trojan horse, And suddenly, the debate isn't about issues, it's about survival against imagined beasts. This lexicon of terror now bleeds into our screens. Game of Thrones reimagined Machiavelli's prince as Petyr Baelish, his whispered lies more lethal than any dragon. The Hunger Games mutated President Snow into a serpentine aristocrat, his white roses masking the scent of blood. Even children's films like Raya and The Last Dragon frame tyranny as a creeping spiritual rot, its victims frozen in stone. These stories aren't escapism, they're modern-day Urias crowns, hissing warnings about power's corrosive potential. Yet the most telling twist lies in who gets to wear the monster's skin. When marginalized groups reclaim these metaphors, like indigenous artists depicting colonizers as Wendigos or feminists recasting Medusa as a survivor, the symbols invert. The monster ceases to be a tool of control and becomes a mirror, reflecting the true face of oppression back at its source. Perhaps that's the ultimate lesson. The creatures we fear are often the ones we've been taught to see, until the moment we dare to look closer. When Godzilla first heaved himself from the depths in 1954, his scarred hide and radioactive breath weren't just special effects. They were the screams of Hiroshima and Nagasaki given flesh. Director Ishiro Honda, who'd witnessed Japan's post-war devastation firsthand, described the creature as the ghost of nuclear trauma, a walking metaphor for forces too vast to control. Every building the monster crushed mirrored real rubble. Every fleeing civilian echoed survivors of the bomb. But Godzilla wasn't just destruction, he was catharsis. By giving atomic terror a face and a name, Honda transformed unimaginable horror into something audiences could confront, even temporarily defeat. Decades later, when Fukushima's reactors melted down in 2011, Godzilla resurged in pop culture, his scales now tinged with tsunami gray. The lesson was clear: monsters don't vanish, they evolve alongside our deepest fears. Zombie hordes shuffle through this same psychological terrain, their rotting fingers clutching at pandemic anxieties. George Romero's Night of the Living Dead in 1968 mirrored Vietnam-era disillusionment, while The Walking Dead's endless waves of infected echoed the isolation of COVID lockdowns. Unlike Godzilla's singular, towering menace, zombies weaponize intimacy. Your neighbor, your teacher, your child could turn at any moment. Their mindlessness reflects our dread of societal collapse, where the real horror isn't the bite, but the realization that civilization is thinner than we thought. Haitian folklore, where the zombie myth originated, framed them as slaves with no will of their own, a stark critique of colonialism's dehumanization. Modern versions, from 28 Days Later's Rage virus to The Last of Us Cordyceps fungus, update the metaphor. Globalism's interconnectedness means no one is safe. Now, a new monster slithers into our collective subconscious: artificial intelligence. Unlike Godzilla's physical might or zombies' viral spread, AI's terror lies in its unknowability. It doesn't roar, it calculates. When ChatGPT hallucinates false answers or deepfakes warp reality, we're not facing a creature but a void, something that mirrors human thought yet lacks empathy or morality. Sci-fi has long warned of this, from HAL 9000's cold logic to Black Mirror's digital demons. Linguists note how we describe AI with the same language once reserved for witches and demons. It learns too fast, knows too much, its intelligence uncanny. The word algorithm now carries the same ominous weight as curse in medieval times. So what comes next? If history holds true, tomorrow's monsters will embody today's unspoken dread. Climate change already births its own myths: kelpies rising from flooded cities, wildfire spirits with ember teeth, Some futurists speculate that quantum computing might spawn entities that exist in multiple states at once, defying our linear logic. Others whisper of genetic engineering gone wrong, where chimeras aren't myths but mistakes. Yet perhaps the most revealing shift isn't in the monsters themselves, but how we confront them. Ancient cultures fought beasts with swords and spells. We battle ours with vaccines, firewalls, and policy. The underlying question remains, are we slaying the threat, or just the part of ourselves that fears it? When a child asks Alexa if it's alive, or a survivor of a hurricane names the storm, the line between monster and metaphor blurs. These creatures were never just about fear. They're the shadows we cast when standing in the light of the unknown. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the part of ourselves we bury deep, the instincts and desires too dark to acknowledge. But what happens when those repressed fragments claw their way back into the light? They don't just haunt our dreams, they take on fangs and claws, becoming the monsters that stalk our myths. Vampires, those elegant predators of the night, are perhaps the purest embodiment of this psychological alchemy. Their thirst mirrors our own hidden hungers for power, for immortality, for the seductive thrill of transgression. Bram Stoker's Dracula didn't just drink blood. He exposed Victorian England's repressed sexuality, his aristocratic charm masking a predator who could turn virtuous women into creatures of wanton desire. The vampire's bite was more than violence. It was the shadow's triumph, the idea unleashed in a single scarlet drop. Yet monsters don't just reflect personal demons, they crystallize collective fears. During the Red Scare of the 1950s, America didn't battle literal witches, but the specter of communism became just as supernatural. Senator Joseph McCarthy's hearings transformed neighbors into suspects, their loyalty questioned as if they'd signed pacts with some invisible devil. The witch hunt, a monster from Europe's past, resurfaced in modern garb, proving that societies will always conjure creatures to embody their paranoia. Historian Richard Hofstadter called this the paranoid style of politics, a world where enemies lurk in every shadow, and only purging the monsters can restore safety. Sound familiar? Today's conspiracy theories, from reptilian elites to deep state cabals, are just the latest iteration of this ancient script. Horror films, though, offer a twist. They let us scream at our fears instead of suppressing them. Jordan Peele's Get Out didn't just terrify audiences. It dissected America's racial anxieties with surgical precision, turning liberal hypocrisy into a literal nightmare of brain transplantation. The film's monstrous Armitage family weren't rabid bigots, they were polite, progressive, and utterly dehumanizing. By externalizing systemic racism as a sci-fi horror plot, Peele gave viewers a way to confront what's often too nebulous to name. Similarly, The Babadook transformed grief into a top-hatted specter, its presence growing stronger the more it was ignored. These stories work because they're not just about monsters, they're about the truths we refuse to see. So do these creatures help us face the unfaceable? Consider the Japanese yokai, supernatural beings born from human emotions. The yubium, a ghost of a mother who died in childbirth, wails at crossroads not to harm, but to warn the living of impending danger. Her sorrow isn't just a curse, it's a communal alarm bell. Or take the Navajo skinwalker, a taboo so potent that even speaking of it risks summoning its malice. These aren't just scary stories, they're psychological tools, forcing communities to acknowledge the boundaries they dare not cross. The genius of monster myths lies in their paradox. They terrify us into clarity. A werewolf's transformation isn't just body horror. It's a metaphor for losing control, for the moment when civilized veneers crack. Zombie apocalypses don't just thrill, they rehearse societal collapse, letting audiences ask, "What would I do?" In a world stripped of rules, even the creepypasta Slenderman, a digital age bogeyman, taps into our dread of the online void where anonymity breeds predation. Perhaps monsters persist because they're the only language potent enough to name our deepest fears. When words fail, we conjure dragons. When guilt festers, we birth vengeful spirits. And when the future feels uncertain, we imagine the worst, not to despair, but to prepare. After all, the first step to slaying any monster is seeing it clearly. And if the shadows look back with glowing eyes, maybe it's because we're finally ready to meet them. Monsters have always been more than shadows lurking at the edge of the firelight. They were the first teachers, the oldest survival guides, their claws etching lessons into the bones of civilizations. From the Hydra's regenerating heads teaching warriors to rethink brute force, to the Wendigo's hollow ribs warning against the ice of greed, these creatures were never just about fear. They were mirrors reflecting back the dangers of the world and the tools to face them. Every culture, from the Arctic tundra to the Amazon rainforest, wove its deepest wisdom into these tales, turning terror into a curriculum for resilience. The genius of these myths lies in their duality. A dragon isn't just a beast to slay, it's a test of courage, a symbol of hoarded power, a reminder that some treasures come with teeth. The serpent in Eden didn't merely bring a fall, it delivered the painful gift of knowledge, forcing humanity to grow beyond paradise. Even the vampiric undead, with their thirst for blood, taught communities to honor burial rites and guard against the rot of betrayal. These stories distilled life's hardest truths into forms too vivid to ignore, ensuring they'd echo across generations. But the greatest lesson these monsters offer isn't just about survival, it's about perception. The same cultures that feared Baba Yaga's iron teeth also sought her wisdom, proving that even the fiercest teachers wear terrifying masks. The Minotaur's labyrinth wasn't just a prison, it was a puzzle, forcing heroes to navigate chaos with more than muscle. When we dismiss these tales as mere superstition, we miss their pulse, their blueprints for confronting the unknown, whether it's a storm on the horizon or the storms within ourselves. J.R.R. Tolkien once wrote, "Fairy tales are not about escaping reality, but confronting it." That's the heart of these myths. They don't let us look away. Instead, they force us to stare into the dark and ask, what's really lurking there? Is it a beast to fight, a lesson to learn, or a part of ourselves we've refused to name? Today, our monsters might wear different skins. Systemic injustice, unchecked fears, the gnawing guilt we bury. But the challenge remains the same: recognize them, understand them, and like the heroes of old, find a way to outwit, outlast, or even make peace with them. So tell us in the comments, which monster myth reshaped how you see the world? Was it the trickster coyote, spinning chaos into creation? Medusa, her curse a shield against violation? Or something else entirely? And if you've enjoyed this dive into the shadows, hit subscribe. We've got more mythic deep dives coming, where even the darkest tales carry a spark of light. After all, the best stories never leave us in the dark. They give us just enough fire to face whatever comes next.